Imagine waking up in the morning and before you even open your eyes, you already know. You know because the air inside your own home bites at your nose. You know because the wood in the stove has burned down to embers and the cold has crept back in like it always does. Patient, relentless, unstoppable. You pull back the blanket and for just a moment, you hesitate. Not out of laziness, not because you don't want to face the day. You hesitate because outside that window, it is 50 degrees below zero. And this is not an emergency. This is not a weather warning. This is just Tuesday. Welcome to Oymyakon, Russia, the coldest permanently inhabited village on the face of the earth. Now, I know what you're thinking. You've heard the word cold before. You've complained about cold. Maybe you've experienced a brutal winter, pipes freezing, car not starting, that kind of thing. But I need you to stop for a second and really try to understand what cold means here, in this place, because it is something else entirely. At -50 degrees Celsius, the moisture in your breath doesn't just form a small cloud in front of your face. It crystallizes instantly, tiny ice particles suspended in the air, falling like glitter, making a faint crackling sound that locals call the whisper of the stars. Your eyelashes freeze together within minutes of stepping outside. The rubber on your car tires becomes so brittle it can crack like glass. If you throw a cup of boiling water into the air, it never hits the ground as liquid. It explodes into a burst of snow before it falls. Metal tools left outside will snap in your hands. And if you leave your car engine off for more than a few hours, you may never start it again. This is not the kind of cold you survive by putting on an extra jacket. This is the kind of cold that rewrites the rules of daily life. Every single rule, from how you eat, to how you sleep, to how you bury your dead. Because even that is a challenge here. The ground is permanently frozen to a depth of nearly 5,000 feet. To dig a grave, residents must first spend days thawing the earth with fires and hot coals just to break through the surface. And yet, people live here, around 500 of them. They were born here. They raise children here. Some of them have never left. And when you ask them why they stay, they don't give you the answer you expect. They don't talk about hardship. They talk about home. Oymyakon sits deep in the Sakha Republic of Eastern Siberia, cradled inside a valley surrounded by mountains on all sides. Those mountains are beautiful. They are also a trap. They block every warm wind that might otherwise offer the valley some relief, while cold Arctic air pours in and pools at the bottom like water filling a bowl. The village lies at 750 meters above sea level, and in winter, the surrounding peaks, rising to over 1,100 meters, create a natural refrigerator with no off switch. Add to that the fact that in the depths of winter, the sun barely rises above the horizon, giving the village as few as 3 hours of pale, weak daylight before darkness swallows everything again. 3 hours of sunlight for months. The record low temperature recorded here was -71.2 degrees Celsius in 1924. The lowest temperature ever measured in any permanently inhabited place on Earth. To put that number into perspective, the average surface temperature on Mars is around -60 degrees. There are nights in Oymyakon that are colder than Mars. There is a monument standing in the center of the village to commemorate that record. It doesn't read like a warning, it reads like a point of pride. The name Oymyakon comes from the indigenous Evenki language and means, rather ironically, unfrozen water, a reference to a thermal spring on the outskirts of the village whose waters remain liquid even in the heart of winter. The same spring that once made this valley a resting stop for nomadic reindeer herders thousands of years ago. They would stop here to water their flocks, rest for the night, and move on. Nobody intended to stay, and then, slowly, people did. Today, the descendants of those nomads, the Yakut people, still call this valley home. They have built a life here across centuries that is so finely tuned to extreme cold that in many ways, they have stopped fighting it altogether. They have joined it. Their clothing, their food, their architecture, their legends, their festivals. Every single part of their culture is a conversation with the cold, a negotiation, And somehow, remarkably, they are winning. Over the course of this video, we are going on a journey into that world. We are going to walk the streets of Oymyakon in the dead of winter. We are going to sit inside the homes of the people who live there. We are going to learn what they eat, how they keep warm, how their children go to school, how they celebrate, how they grieve, and how they find meaning, even joy, in a place that the rest of the world would consider uninhabitable. Because here is the truth that Oymyakon will teach you, if you let it. Humans are not fragile. We are not creatures built only for comfort and convenience. We are built for adaptation. We are built for endurance. And somewhere buried inside all of us is the same stubborn, extraordinary will to survive that has kept a flame burning in the coldest village on Earth for generations. This is their story, and it starts right now. Most people, if you showed them a map and asked them to point to Oymyakon, couldn't do it. And honestly, that's part of what makes this place so extraordinary. It isn't just cold, it is forgotten by the world, end of the road, you have to really mean it, kind of remote. Oymyakon sits in the Sakha Republic, also known as Yakutia, in the far northeast of Russia. To give you a sense of scale, the Sakha Republic alone is larger than Argentina. It is the biggest federal subject in the world by area, and yet its entire population is less than 1 million people. Oymyakon is not near the center of that vast territory. It is pushed into the deep interior, tucked into a highland valley along the Indigirka River, closer to the Arctic Circle than it is to any major city. The nearest city, Yakutsk, is roughly 930 kilometers away. That might not sound impossible until you understand that the road connecting them is the Kolyma Highway, a route so brutal, so unforgiving, so soaked in dark history that it has earned a name most people only whisper: the Road of Bones. We will return to that road later in this video, because it deserves its own story. But for now, just understand this. Getting to Oymyakon takes 2 full days of driving under the best conditions. In winter, those conditions are rarely best. There is no railway. There is no nearby airport. If you live in Oymyakon and something goes wrong, a medical emergency, a supply shortage, a crisis of any kind, help is very, very far away. The village exists almost entirely on its own terms, sustained by its people, its traditions, and a collective understanding that out here, you look after each other or you don't make it. And yet, stand at the edge of that valley and look out, and what you see is breathtaking. Mountains rising on every side, ancient and silent, a frozen river cutting through the white landscape below, wooden houses with smoke rising from their chimneys in thick columns against a sky so blue and clear, it almost doesn't look real. In the right light, and the light here, when it appears, is unlike anywhere else on Earth. Oymyakon looks less like a place people are merely surviving and more like a place they chose, deliberately, defiantly, which, when you think about it, is exactly what it is. On a January morning in 1924, a thermometer in the Oymyakon Valley registered a temperature of -71.2 degrees Celsius, -96.2 degrees Fahrenheit. It remains to this day the lowest temperature ever recorded in any permanently inhabited place on Earth. And it is commemorated right in the center of the village, a monument standing in the town square next to a statue of a concrete bull, marking the exact spot where that reading was taken. Think about that for a moment. Most towns put monuments in their squares to honor heroes, victories, founding fathers. Oymyakon put one up to honor a number on a thermometer. Because here, surviving the cold is the victory. Enduring the temperature is the heroism. The official weather station record came 9 years later, February 6, 1933, when -67.7 degrees Celsius was formally recorded and entered into the scientific record. That temperature stands as the lowest officially verified reading in the entire northern hemisphere. Both records belong to this one small valley in Siberia, shared between the village of Oymyakon and its neighbor Verkhoyansk, 629 kilometers away. The only 2 places on the planet where every single day in January has, at some point, recorded temperatures below -60 degrees Celsius. Now, The average winter temperature sits around -50 degrees Celsius, and the word average is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, because -50 is not a number that softens with familiarity. At that temperature, your breath doesn't just mist. It freezes on your scarf, your collar, your eyebrows before you've taken 3 steps. Glasses fuse to your face. Metal conducts the cold so efficiently that touching a doorknob with a bare hand will pull the skin right off your palm. Diesel fuel thickens. Batteries die within minutes. And the silence outside is total and absolute, because even sound seems to slow down in air that cold. There is a local phenomenon here called the whisper of the stars. When the temperature drops deep enough, the moisture in your breath freezes midair and falls as the faintest shower of ice crystals, producing a sound so delicate it is barely a sound at all, just a soft hiss, like the world itself is exhaling. Locals have heard it their entire lives. To a visitor, it is unforgettable. To the people of Oymyakon, it is simply the sound of winter. The alarm goes off at 6 in the morning. Outside, it is still completely dark. It will stay dark for another 2 hours, maybe 3 if you are lucky. The temperature overnight dropped to -53. Not a record, not even worth mentioning to a neighbor. Just another winter morning in Oymyakon. The first thing a resident does before anything else, before coffee, before breakfast, before checking on the children, is tend to the fire. The wood-burning stove is not a charming rustic feature. It is the difference between a livable home and a frozen one. Most houses here burn through more than 100 cubic meters of larch wood every single winter, just to maintain a temperature inside that a person can function in. The firewood is not delivered on demand. It is gathered, stacked, and stored in the months before winter arrives. Because once the cold sets in, you work with what you have. Running out of wood in February in Oymyakon is not an inconvenience. It is a life-threatening emergency. Once the fire is up, the morning routine begins, and every step of it has been adapted around the cold in ways that would seem extraordinary anywhere else in the world, but are simply normal here. Getting dressed takes considerably longer than it does for most people. Thermal underlayers first, then wool, then outer garments lined with fur. Traditional reindeer skin coats and boots are not fashion choices. They are engineering solutions refined over centuries. Modern synthetic insulation has made its way into Oymyakon, but the old materials still outperform most of it. The Yakut people figured out a long time ago that reindeer fur, with its hollow individual hairs that trap warm air, is one of the most effective insulators nature has ever produced. Science caught up to that knowledge only recently. The children get dressed with the same layered precision. They pull on their camoose boots, traditional footwear made from the skin of reindeer hooves, stiff and warm and perfectly suited to the frozen ground, and they head to school. And yes, school runs. It runs every day through temperatures that would shut down entire cities in other parts of the world. The school in Oymyakon has just over 100 students, and the rule is simple. Classes are canceled only when the temperature drops below -52 degrees Celsius. On most winter mornings, it hasn't quite reached that threshold, so the children go. They walk in the dark, in the cold, past houses exhaling wood smoke, under a sky still full of stars, and they sit down at their desks and they learn. Alongside mathematics and language and history, they are also taught something no standardized curriculum anywhere else covers: how to survive here, how to read the signs of frostbite, how to navigate in a whiteout, how to respect a cold that does not negotiate. Meanwhile, outside in the village, the cars have been running all night. Not because anyone forgot to turn them off, because turning them off is not an option. At these temperatures, an engine left cold for even a few hours can freeze solid, and no amount of effort will start it again until it has been warmed. A process that can take the better part of a day using blowtorches and heated garages. So, the engines run. Through the night, through the early morning, the sound of idling vehicles is as constant a feature of winter in Oymyakon as the cold itself. Those without heated garages leave their cars running around the clock for the entire season. By midday, the sun has risen, weakly, briefly, and for 2 or 3 hours, the village exists in a kind of pale golden half-light that turns the snow into something almost beautiful. Residents move quickly during these hours. Errands are run, firewood is moved, animals are tended to. Then the light fades again, and the cold reasserts itself with the confidence of something that knows it always wins in the end. There is no grocery store in Oymyakon in any sense that most people would recognize. There are no fresh vegetables lining refrigerated shelves, no fruit flown in from somewhere warm, no rows of packaged goods kept at a controlled temperature. The permafrost that locks this valley in ice year-round makes agriculture completely impossible. Nothing grows here. The ground never fully thaws. And so, the people of Oymyakon have built an entire food culture around a single principle. Eat what the land gives you, and eat enough of it to stay warm. What the land gives you here is meat. Reindeer meat, horse meat, and fish from the Indigirka River form the foundation of almost every meal. These are not backup options or acquired tastes. They are survival food in the most literal sense, rich in fat, dense in calories, exactly what a body burning enormous amounts of energy just to stay warm needs to keep going. A person living and working outdoors in Oymyakon in January can burn through calories at a rate that would stagger most nutritionists. The diet here is not designed around wellness trends or dietary preferences. It is designed around the cold. The fish is a story of its own. Ice fishing on the Indigirka River is not a weekend hobby. It is a primary food source, practiced with a seriousness and skill passed down through generations. A hole is cut through ice that can be over a meter thick. A line is dropped, and the wait begins. In temperatures where standing still for too long means the cold starts working on you in earnest. The fish that come up through that hole, Arctic whitefish, white salmon, grayling, are considered among the finest in Russia, and locals eat them in a way that surprises most outsiders, raw and frozen, sliced thin like shavings of ice, dipped in salt. The dish is called stroganina, and to the people of Oymyakon, it is not exotic, it is simply dinner. Horse meat carries a deep cultural significance here that goes beyond nutrition. The Yakutian horse is a breed unlike any other, short, stocky, covered in a coat so thick it can sleep outside in negative 50-degree temperatures without shelter and wake up fine. These animals are not just livestock. They are companions in survival, woven into the identity and folklore of the Yakut people for thousands of years. Eating horse meat is not a contradiction of that relationship. It is an expression of it, a recognition that in this place, every living thing gives what it has so that others may continue. Fresh fruit and vegetables do exist in Oymyakon, but they arrive from hundreds of kilometers away. They cost considerably more than most residents would spend on a week's worth of meat, and they are treated accordingly, as a luxury, a small, bright thing in the middle of a long, white winter. In their absence, locals have always turned to the land's own alternatives. Wild berries gathered and preserved in the brief summer months carry vitamins through the darkest part of the year. Traditional fermented and dairy products, thick, tangy, made from the milk of local cattle, fill nutritional gaps in ways that have kept this community healthy across centuries. And healthy is not an exaggeration. The people of Oymyakon, despite, or perhaps because of, a diet and lifestyle that bears almost no resemblance to modern health advice, are known for their extraordinary longevity. There are residents here who have lived past 100. The clean air, the physical demands of daily life, the food that is chemical-free and as local as food can possibly get. Something in this brutal place agrees with the human body in ways that science is still trying to fully understand. There is a road that connects Oymyakon to the rest of Russia. It is called the Kolyma Highway. It stretches roughly 2,000 kilometers through some of the most desolate, unforgiving terrain on the planet, crossing 3 major mountain ranges, cutting through dense Siberian taiga, threading between frozen rivers and valleys where the wind comes down from the Arctic with nothing to slow it. In summer, sections of it turn to mud so deep that trucks disappear into it up to their axles. In winter, it becomes a corridor of ice and darkness that demands total respect from everyone who drives it. But the road's geography is not what gave it its name. The Kolyma Highway was built in the 1930s under Joseph Stalin's Soviet regime, constructed almost entirely by prisoners of the Gulag. the vast network of Soviet labor camps that stretched across Siberia during that era. Men and women were sent here from every corner of the Soviet Union, convicted of crimes real and imagined, stripped of their names and their histories, and put to work in temperatures that killed without warning or apology. They built the road with hand tools, in conditions that defied survival. Tens of thousands of them died here, from cold, from exhaustion, from starvation, from the systematic cruelty of a regime that valued the road more than the lives building it. Their bodies, in many cases, were never retrieved. They were buried where they fell, beneath the permafrost, beneath the very road that bears the weight of every vehicle that passes over it today. That is why it is called the Road of Bones. Driving it today in a modern vehicle with a heater running and supplies in the back is still an undertaking that demands preparation and nerve. There are stretches where there is nothing, no town, no station, no help, for hundreds of kilometers in either direction. Breaking down is not an inconvenience. It is a genuine emergency. Locals who make the journey travel with spare fuel, extra food, emergency supplies, and the phone numbers of the handful of people along the route who might be able to reach them if something goes wrong. They do not drive it alone if they can help it. They do not drive it without telling someone exactly where they are going and when they expect to arrive. And yet, people drive it regularly because it is the only way in and out. The Road of Bones is not a relic or a tourist attraction. It is a lifeline. It is the vein through which supplies, medicine, and connection to the outside world flow into Oymyakon. Every piece of fruit that reaches the village traveled this road. Every piece of machinery, every spare part, every luxury and necessity that cannot be produced locally came down this highway. The road that was built on suffering is now the thread that keeps a community alive. To understand Oymyakon fully, you have to understand that the people who live here do not see the cold as their enemy. They never have. For the indigenous Yakut people, one of the most resilient indigenous cultures on Earth, the cold is not something to be defeated or escaped. It is something to be respected, understood, and ultimately befriended. And that relationship with the cold is woven into every thread of their culture, from their language to their legends, to the way they celebrate the turning of the season. At the center of Yakut, winter mythology stands the figure of Chyskhaan, the Lord of Frost. He is not a villain in their folklore. He is not the cold as punishment or curse. He is a guardian, a powerful ancient presence who rules the frozen world with authority and, in his own way, with fairness. The Yakut people do not pray for Chyskhaan to leave. They honor him. They acknowledge his dominion, and in doing so, they find a kind of peace with the very force that makes their lives so extraordinarily difficult. This relationship with Chyskhaan is most visible during the Cold Pole Festival, held at the end of winter each year. The village comes alive in a way that catches first-time visitors completely off guard. Reindeer races tear across the frozen ground. Dog sledding competitions draw competitors from across the region. Ice fishing contests are held on the frozen river. There is music, traditional food, dancing, and the kind of laughter that sounds especially vivid against a landscape that is otherwise so silent. The festival is not a distraction from the cold. It is a celebration of having survived it. A community gathered together to say collectively that they are still here, still standing, still warm enough on the inside to dance. This is what the outside world tends to miss about Oymyakon. It looks from a distance like a place defined entirely by hardship. But up close, it is a place defined by culture, by identity, by a people who have looked at one of the harshest environments on Earth and decided, across generations, that it is theirs. There is a question that almost everyone asks when they first learn about Oymyakon. It is the same question, every time, phrased in slightly different ways. How? How do they do it? How does a human body function in temperatures that freeze metal, crack rubber, and turn boiling water into snow before it hits the ground? How does a community not just survive, but sustain itself, generation after generation, in a place that seems designed by nature to be uninhabitable? The answer is not one thing. It is everything, layered together. Centuries of accumulated knowledge, practical engineering, cultural wisdom, and a psychological relationship with hardship that most of the modern world has completely lost touch with. Start with the houses. From the outside, the traditional wooden homes of Oymyakon look simple. Low, squat structures built from larch timber, half buried in snow, smoke rising from every chimney. But the simplicity is deceptive. These buildings are the product of generations of refinement, each design decision shaped by the single overriding priority of keeping the cold out. The walls are thick, layered constructions that insulate far beyond what standard building codes in warmer countries would ever require. Windows are triple or quadruple glazed, trapping air between each layer as an additional thermal barrier. Every entrance has a vestibule, a small enclosed chamber between the outer door and the inner door. That functions as an airlock, preventing the brutal outside air from rushing directly into the living space every time someone enters or leaves. These are not luxury features. They are non-negotiable architecture in a place where a gap in your insulation is a gap in your survival. Beneath the houses, the permafrost presents its own engineering challenge. The ground here is frozen solid to a depth of nearly 5,000 feet, and any heat that escapes downward from the building will gradually thaw the top layer of that frozen earth, destabilizing the foundation. Traditional Yakut construction accounts for this by elevating structures slightly above the ground, allowing cold air to circulate underneath and keep the permafrost stable. It is a counterintuitive solution, deliberately letting cold air flow beneath your home to protect it. But it works, and it has worked here for a very long time. Then there is the clothing. There is a reason the Yakut people have not simply adopted modern synthetic cold weather gear and abandoned their traditional garments entirely. Modern materials are good. Traditional reindeer fur is better. The fur of a reindeer is uniquely structured at the microscopic level. Each individual hair is hollow, creating thousands of tiny air pockets that trap warmth with an efficiency that even the most advanced technical fabrics struggle to match. A full traditional outfit, coat, hat, gloves, and camoose boots can keep a person alive and functional in temperatures that would kill someone in standard winter clothing within minutes. This is not folklore, this is physics, and the Yakut people understood it long before anyone put it in a laboratory. The mind, too, has been adapted. This is perhaps the most underappreciated dimension of survival in Oymyakon, and in some ways the most remarkable. Psychological adaptation to extreme cold is real, documented, and profound. Residents here do not experience the same cold-induced panic and disorientation that overwhelms people unaccustomed to these temperatures. They have been conditioned from childhood to remain calm, methodical, and deliberate in the cold, to move efficiently, to never rush in a way that causes sweating, which can then freeze against the skin and accelerate heat loss dramatically. They know instinctively how long they can stay outside before exposure becomes dangerous. They know the early signs of frostbite on a face or fingertip, the way most people know the signs of a common cold. And they know, above all else, that the cold rewards preparation and punishes carelessness with a consistency that demands respect. Community is the final survival secret, and arguably the most important one. In Oymyakon, the social fabric is not just a cultural nicety, it is a survival mechanism. Neighbors check on each other, emergency supplies are shared without hesitation. When a heating system fails, and in temperatures this extreme, systems do fail, the community responds. Nobody freezes alone in Oymyakon if anyone else can prevent it. That collective vigilance, that deeply embedded culture of mutual responsibility, is as much a part of how this village survives as the insulation in its walls or the fur on its coats. It is perhaps the warmest thing about the coldest place on Earth. There is a moment every year in Oymyakon when the long darkness begins to loosen its grip. The days grow slightly longer, the light lingers a few minutes more each afternoon, and somewhere beneath the meters of packed snow, the Earth remembers, very distantly, almost theoretically, that it has not always been frozen. It is in this moment, at the turning point of the Siberian winter, that Oymyakon does something that the rest of the world tends not to expect from the coldest village on Earth. It throws a party. The Cold Pole Festival is one of the most unique celebrations anywhere on the planet, and it is exactly what it sounds like. A festival held at the Pole of Cold, in temperatures that would send most festival goers running for the nearest heated building, attended by people who have spent months enduring one of the most punishing winters imaginable, and who have decided, collectively, that this is worth celebrating. Not surviving in spite of the cold, surviving because of everything the cold has made them. The centerpiece of the festival is Chyskhaan himself, the mythical Lord of Frost, who appears in full ceremonial costume, a towering figure draped in white and silver, his presence a living reminder that the cold is not a force to be feared, but a force to be honored. Children line up to meet him. Elders watch with the quiet satisfaction of people who have seen this ceremony many times and find in its repetition something deeply reassuring. The continuity of it matters as much as the spectacle. Around this central figure, the festival unfolds in every direction. Reindeer races thunder across the frozen ground, the animals moving with a speed and grace that seems impossible given the conditions, their breath streaming behind them in long, white plumes. Dog sled teams compete in events that test not just speed, but the handling skill of the musher, reading the terrain, managing the team, navigating a route through a landscape that all looks the same to an outsider, but is as readable as a map to someone who grew up here. Ice fishing competitions draw participants to holes cut in the frozen Indigirka River, where patience and technique are rewarded with fish pulled up through ice over a meter thick, frozen almost instantly in the open air and eaten on the spot. But beyond the competitions and the spectacle, what strikes visitors most about the Cold Pole Festival is the atmosphere. There is a warmth here, entirely human, entirely earned, that has nothing to do with temperature. People gather around fires not just for heat, but for conversation. Traditional food is shared freely. Music that has been played in this valley for generations fills the cold air and somehow makes it feel less hostile. The faces of the people of Oymyakon at this festival do not look like the faces of people enduring something. They look like the faces of people who belong exactly where they are. And that, more than any temperature record or survival statistic, is the most extraordinary thing about this place. That belonging, that rootedness, that absolute unshakable sense of home in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. The Cold Pole Festival does not just mark the end of another brutal winter. It is a declaration, made in reindeer races and frozen fish and the laughter of children in fur coats, that the people of Oymyakon were here last year, they are here this year, and they will be here next year too. The cold has never beaten them yet. Stand here for a moment. Just stand here. You are at the Pole of Cold Monument in the center of Oymyakon, Russia. The temperature is negative 51 degrees Celsius. The sky above you is the deepest, clearest shade of blue you have ever seen in your life. A blue so pure and cold, it looks almost artificial, like someone painted it. The monument in front of you is simple, a sign, a number. A record that belongs to this valley and nowhere else on Earth. Around you, wooden houses exhale wood smoke into the still air. A dog trots past, completely unbothered. Somewhere nearby, a car engine idles. It has been idling since last night. It will idle until spring. And you realize, standing here, that everything you thought you knew about what a human life requires has just been quietly, thoroughly dismantled. We live in an age that is obsessed with comfort. Not contentment, comfort. The thermostat set to exactly the right temperature. The grocery store stocked with every fruit from every corner of the planet, regardless of season. The instant, frictionless access to warmth and food and connection at any hour of any day. We have built an entire civilization around the elimination of discomfort. And somewhere in that process, without quite noticing, we began to confuse comfort with happiness. We began to assume that the easier life becomes, the better it must be. Oymyakon does not make that assumption. It never has. The people who live in this valley have never had the option of easy. The cold does not negotiate. The permafrost does not make exceptions. The darkness of a Siberian winter does not shorten itself because someone finds it inconvenient. And so, the people here have built their lives not around the elimination of hardship, but around the mastery of it. They have looked at every brutal condition this environment has thrown at them and responded not with retreat, but with ingenuity, not with complaint, but with adaptation. Not with the question of how do we leave, but with the far more powerful question of how do we stay. That distinction matters more than it might seem, because the decision to stay, repeated across generations, renewed by every child born here and every elder who dies here and is buried in ground that had to be thawed by fire just to receive them, is not a passive thing. It is not simply the absence of leaving. It is an active, ongoing, daily act of commitment to a place and a people and a way of life that the rest of the world would struggle to comprehend. Every morning that a resident of Oymyakon rises before dawn, tends the fire, layers on their reindeer fur, and steps out into temperatures that could kill an unprepared person in minutes, they are making a choice, a quiet, unremarkable, extraordinary choice to be here, to belong here, to live here on the land's own terms rather than their own. There is a lesson in that for all of us, and it is not the lesson you might expect. It is not that we should all go and live in the coldest place on earth, or that comfort is inherently wrong, or that suffering builds character in some simple arithmetic way. The lesson is subtler than that. It is about what happens to a community when hardship is shared rather than hidden, when survival is a collective project rather than an individual pursuit, when the cold outside is so relentless and so indifferent that the only rational response is to turn toward each other, to check on your neighbor, to share your firewood, to show up at the festival even when your eyelashes are freezing together, because showing up is how you tell the people around you that you are still here and you still care and this community still means something. That is what Oymyakon has preserved, perhaps more completely than anywhere else on earth, the ancient, essential human truth that we are not built to survive alone. We are built for each other. The cold taught them that. The cold keeps teaching it every single winter, to every single person in this valley, without exception and without mercy. Think about the reindeer breeder Andrei Danilov, who has lived his entire life here and is 102 years old. His father died at 117, his mother at 108. 3 generations of a family living in the coldest place on earth, outliving the average life expectancy of almost every warm and comfortable country on the planet. There is something in the clean air, in the unprocessed food, in the physical demands of daily life, in the absence of the particular modern stresses that corrode a person slowly from the inside. There is something in all of that which agrees profoundly with the human body and the human spirit. The cold does not just take from these people. It gives back in ways that are only visible over a lifetime, over several lifetimes. The world is changing. The permafrost beneath Oymyakon is shifting as global temperatures rise. The winters, some locals say, are not quite what they were. The youngest generation here faces a future that their grandparents could not have predicted, in a landscape that is beginning, slowly and irreversibly, to change beneath their feet. What that means for this community, for its traditions, its identity, its extraordinary relationship with the cold, is a question that nobody can fully answer yet. But if history is any guide, the people of Oymyakon will adapt. They always have. Adaptation is not just a survival strategy here. It is a cultural inheritance. It is who they are. So, as we leave this valley, as the monument shrinks behind us and the wooden houses disappear into the white and the sound of that idling engine fades into the distance, carry something with you from this place. Not the cold, not the hardship, but the reminder that human beings are capable of far more than comfort allows us to discover. That there are people on this earth living full, meaningful, rooted, joyful lives in conditions that most of us cannot even imagine. And that somewhere in the coldest village on the coldest days, when the whisper of the stars fills the frozen air, and the fire burns low, and the darkness stretches on and on, there is still warmth. There has always been warmth. Because the people of Oymyakon put it there, and they are not going anywhere. Put it there, and they are not going anywhere.